Let's create a new form in this inventory application, and let's rename this as FRM inventory. Okay, so in this, actually what we are going to do is like we are going to consume the product service these fields. Actually we will try to invoke this service and try to show it in a segmented UI. Besides that, I'll also place another flex container wherein I'll try to show the values of these individual fields of any record. I'll also try to show, bind these values to a list box, and whenever that list box drop down value changes, let's also try to show the selected record information in the flex container. So this is what we are going to do now. Simplicity sake, I have already created the form for us actually. So I have placed three different flex container segment. In the flex container, first flex container, I placed a one button. Inside this button, like when I click the button, I'll try to make a network call, fabric call, get the data. Once I get the data, I'll try to show that data in the segmented UI, and I'll choose one record and try to show that records information here. I'll also try to bind all those records to this list box. Okay, so this is what we are going to do. For now, let's associate the button click now. The form here. In the controller, I have added the function to make the fabric call, and this is the callback for that network call. In this callback function, we are actually assigning the records into some temporary variable and trying to print that variable. So now let's utilize these records or this data to show it onto a segmented UI. So how do typically what we do is like in this particular function itself, we iterate through all these objects and try to create a new object from that, which actually can be passed to the segmented UI. So this is what typically we do, right? But using the MVVM, we don't have to do that. We will simply say like as soon as we retrieve the data, we will actually pass that information to the object. So here we can pass that information to the object. So this is a data context property which is by default available on any form controller which is actually using the MVVM framework. But are we utilizing the MVVM framework now? No. So how do I leverage the MVVM framework in my application? To leverage the MVVM framework in the application, first and foremost thing which we have to do is like inside the modules, we have to add the Kony MVVM framework.js file. So this is shipped loosely, and you have to take this file and add this file to your project. And once you have this framework file in the code, then go back to your controller, and for each form controller we will have a function called onViewCreated function, which is by default available. Inside this function, we will register our form controller with a view controller. So how do I create a view controller? This line actually creates a view model controller. So now I have created a view model controller. Now what should I do? The next thing which we have to do is like, let's bind the information, data context, whatever the records we have, let's bind those information to the segmented UI. So how do I do that? Typically each and every widget in Kony framework has a property called info. This is a read-write property, and this is being introduced by the frameworks so that app developers wanted to preserve some information with respect to each widget. Unfortunately, that is not being exposed in the visualizer as a property here, but you can use it through code. So if that is exposed by a visualizer, then we could have directly added the binding information in it. But since it is not exposed in the visualizer, let's use that variable to feed the binding information. So this is how we typically we have a seg inventory segmented UI. On that we have an info property. I am binding this information here. It's similar to our widget data map, wherein I'll have the widget data map key and the actual path inside the object. Like we have binded the data context object right here. So this data context typically holds the array of products. So for each product, what is the path? For LBL name field, I am using this. So these are the things which we are how to pass. And now let's run the application. Form is rendered. So we have binded only this segmented UI with the data context, and these are still the static content only. See here, all the segmented UI's information is already being shown in the segmented UI now. Okay, so now I wanted to next what I'll do is like I have a list box on the form. I wanted to bind this list box key as the product ID and value as the product name to this list box. If you see here, what I'm trying in this trying to do in this particular line is like to this list box I have provided the path as the since we didn't mention the VM property, that means it is binding to the data context. So inside the data context I am providing the key and value path. So typically -1 means return me entire array of items. For each item give me the product ID as key, and for each row item give me the product name as a value. If you see here, all the data of the segmented UI is filled with the products, and here all the product items are shown or filled inside the list box. Okay, so next item what we will do is like we will try to bind this UI with the current record. So what I'll try to do is like as soon as I am returning as soon as we received the data, I'll assign this dot current product equals to, maybe I'll try to assign the first item. Okay, but do we have this property currently on our controller? No. So we need to create that property now. So let me write a utils function to create the property using setters and getters. If you see this function, it is simply creating a new property with the given prop1 name, and it's a read write property. Okay, so now I'll try to create the property. This dot create property, and the product name is current product. Okay, so essentially onv created gets called first, so automatically it creates the current product property. In the button click we are getting the data. Once we get the data, we are assigning the current product or 0th product item to the current product now. So we have the current product ready. So now what I wanted to do is like I wanted to bind these current product values onto these particular labels, right? So to do this, there is a difference between a normal property and a view model property. View model property typically is exactly more or less similar to the normal property, except that it will actually raise an event as soon as some value is getting up. So if you see here, I have added these two lines inside the property. So now this property becomes a view model property. Now I can bind any of my widget to this particular property. Okay. So how do I bind the labels now? Let me show you. If you see here, the label name, I am assigning a binding to the current product property, and the path inside that object is product name. To the cost, I am assigning the cost. To the ID, I am assigning the binding the product ID. Let me run the application once to check whether these three labels getting updated or not. Later we will also see how this checkbox and the images gets updated depending on the binding information. I am fetching the data now. You see here, segmented data gets updated from the data context. List box content gets updated from the data context, and the current record, if you see, the first item is shown as binded here, name, price and ID. Okay, so now let's bind the switch and the image. To bind the image or switch, so whatever the data we are getting, it's not in the same format as an image or a switch accepts. So for example, in our case, we are binding the rating. Here if you see, we are binding the image to the rating, and switch to the stock available property. But if you see, this product rating actually being returned as a string, but it holds the numbers from 0 to 5. And the stock available is being returned as string, but the holds the value as true and false. But it is actually being bounded to selected index of the switch, and this product rating, whatever is there, would be assigned to the source property of a image widget. But source accepts the string, but typically that source must be a HTTP URL or a local asset path. But this product rating is actually returning static text as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, how do I tell my image widget that if product rating is 0, take show one image, if it is 2, show a different image. So how to do that is something which we will see now. In the assets, we have added images for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5, there are 6 different ratings available. So for each rating, we are actually showing one image here. Okay. Now what typically we have to do is, like, we have to add a custom formatter to this. So how do I add a custom formatter? Custom formatters are simple. Once we get the value, how do I show that value is something which has to be defined by the app developer? To do that, they have to create a new require file, which is a VM config file. So let's go to the project and add a view model config in the file. So this is the view model config file. So here, if rating is changed, okay, so typically that object value is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So we are constructing the source from that object value and assigning that to the widget.source here. Okay, but how do I inform that whenever there is a value coming like this, you need to call this on product rating change? How do I convey this? Similarly, for the switch also, If the true value is coming, the selected index is 1. If a value is coming as false, we are setting the selected index as 0. But how do I convey my switch binding information to call this function for whenever we get the information in this format? Let's go back to the controller. Since we have added the config file and we have added the formatters inside this, let's inform the widget in the binding information that you need to call this function. How do I do that? So if you see here, there is a new key inside the binding object is on before set. So this function gets executed just before the value is set to the widget. So before setting it to the widget, app developers has the luxury to change the way they apply a formatter to set the value to the widget. So this function actually gets called just before value is being set to the widget. This is how the formatter gets executed. Let's also apply the similar formatter to the switch. Okay, so now we are good. Let's run the application and see whether it is binded properly or not. You see? So all the records got updated now. Now what we will do is like the list box by default is shown with the no selection at all. Now in the code actually we have selected the 0th item. So what we will do is like, let's make the current product whatever is being selected as the selected item for the list box. So our list box is already binded to the data context with the data property. Now I wanted to bind the selected key property to the current product. Okay, how can I do that? If you see here, list box master data property is binded to the list of items on the data context with the specified key and value path, and the selected key is binded to the product different property called current product, and the path on that is to the product ID. Okay, so this is how my selected item automatically gets updated depending on the current product. To check this actually, let's run the app once and see whether the selected item in the list box gets updated with the 0th record or not, because we are assigning the 0th record here. You see, plain crook neck t-shirt is the first item, and we got the current record is got updated with the first record. Even the selected item is also there. Earlier this used to show the empty thing, right? So now since I am able to bind the selected item also to this, now as soon as I change something else, if I select another record, I wanted to make that as a current record, so that I wanted to see this information pertaining to the current product. So if I select a different item, I wanted to see the details of this particular item. Okay, how can I do this now? It's simple actually. So what you can easily do is like, for this thing selected key, you can simply add another property called mode and simply say two-way. That means earlier one-way means selected key is being updated from the current product, and as soon as the selection changes, if we say two-way, the selected key also updates the current product now. Anyway, since we already binded our labels, images and switch to the current product, when the selected key changes, automatically current product changes, and if the current product changes, all the labels and the switch images information also updates. Okay. Let's run the final time. You see entire data, all the products are binded to the segmented UI, and the current record is binded here. I'm changing this to something else. Automatically data gets updated. You see here. So this is how the data binding plays vital role in the MVVM. So if you see the source code here, you didn't write single line of code other than the formatters. You just provided the data here and good to go. Nothing. This is anyway one-time activity which should be done by the either visualizer or in the uncreated view by the app developer only one time, and create property is also done only one time. So essentially we haven't written any code other than the formatters. So these are the two formatters which we have written to achieve our functionality. Other than these two things and setting the value to the property, other than these things we haven't done any code to achieve that behavior which we have seen in the application. So this way, if you see here, except in this uncreated view, we never ever interacted with the view. We were straight away writing the business logic, or we are saying like, okay, I have got the multiple products now, and out of which what is my current selected product, this is the product. Okay, now I am showing this product to the end user, whether he would be interested to buy it or not, he will decide. And at any point of time, one current product would be there and he will act on that current product. So in this thing we will write the business logic only, but not the view specific code. If tomorrow UI designers wanted to change the UI from this to something else, they can actually do it without a single line of change in the controller code. So this is the advantage of MVVM.